Think for a moment about those private conversations, maybe even with the people closest to us. Something that maybe doesn't always get talked about openly is how comfortable women really feel voicing their sexual desires. It's
Yeah.
surprisingly common, actually. And if it hasn't affected you directly, you probably know someone it has.
It's a really crucial point, that gap,
Mm.
the difference between what someone truly wants sexually and what they feel they can actually say, that can have a big impact, a ripple effect, not just on their own satisfaction, but on the whole relationship, the intimacy.
Exactly. And that's what we're really digging into today. We've got some pretty compelling psychological research that helps unpack the why behind it all. We want to shed some light on the reasons so many women find it, well, tough to talk about their sexual desires. Hopefully offer some useful insights into this sensitive area.
Yeah, and our main source for this deep dive is a really thought-provoking piece from Psychology Today. It looks closely at a study about how women communicate, or maybe more often, how they don't communicate these desires with their partners.
Okay, so let's get right into it then. A key finding right off the bat is that a lot of women report feeling genuinely uneasy talking about sex and their specific wants with their partners. And it's not just a small thing, is it? The research draws a really clear line connecting this lack of communication to lower sexual satisfaction for both people involved.
That's the core of it, yeah. If those desires aren't spoken, they're much less likely to be met, which naturally leads to less fulfillment. It sounds simple, but understanding what stops that open conversation is, well, it's key to better sexual well-being.
And, the article makes this really important distinction early on. I think we need to cover this. We're not just talking about, like, fleeting sexual fantasies someone might have but doesn't actually want to do.
Yeah.
The author gives this interesting example. The cuckold fantasy, it might be arousing for someone, sure, but they might have zero desire for it to happen in real life.
That's a vital clarification. Absolutely. Our inner fantasy world can be incredibly varied,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't always map onto what we want in reality. So our focus here isn't those purely mental scenarios. It's about the real sexual urges, the preferences women do want to experience, but for various reasons keep quiet about.
Which sort of brings us to the bigger picture. The article touches on historical context, these societal things called sexual scripts, how they've shaped women's sexuality or maybe held it back over time. The idea is that historically, and maybe still today, women often felt less power in sexual situations.
And it's fascinating how deeply ingrained those societal expectations can become. These scripts can subtly, sometimes quite obviously, dictate what's seen as okay or appropriate sexual behavior for women. And that can definitely feed into feeling less entitled, maybe less empowered to voice what they genuinely want without worrying about judgment or, a negative reaction.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into the study itself. The specific reasons. This was over 1,000 women, aged 18 to over 70, explaining why they didn't talk about their desires. The numbers here really paint a picture.
They really do. Top of the list, a big one at 42.4%, was not wanting to hurt their partner's feelings. And right behind that, 40.2% was just feeling uncomfortable going into the details.
And then you see embarrassment, 37.7%. And a really significant number, 35%, said they didn't even know how to ask for what they wanted sexually. That one really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
It points to maybe a lack of education or even just permission to develop that kind of vocabulary around sex.
Exactly. It highlights a potential gap in, let's say, sexual education that's broader than just mechanics. We often don't give people the language, the framework to talk about needs and desires confidently. And that silence, well, it can just keep cycles of dissatisfaction going.
There are other reasons too, right? Like not wanting to seem demanding.
Yep, that was 18.3%. And almost as many, 17.9%, felt discussing desires wasn't even that important.
Wow. Then you have fear of rejection at 11.7%, thinking their partner wouldn't understand at 10.2%, and a similar number, 10.1%, worried about being seen as, quote, perverted.
And finally, a concerning 7% felt their partner just didn't care about their pleasure.
It's quite a list.
It is. It shows this really complex mix of worries, doesn't it? Concerns about the partner's reaction, personal feelings like awkwardness or shame, even fundamental beliefs about whether their own satisfaction matters. It really highlights how vulnerable it can feel to share something so intimate.
And it gets even more interesting when the study zoomed in on the younger group, the 18 to 24-year-olds. Some of these reasons were much more common for them.
Yes, that's a key point. This younger group had notably higher rates of not knowing how to ask for what they wanted, and also a greater fear of rejection. Plus, quite a few felt talking about desires mattered less because they weren't sure how long the relationship or the sexual part of it would last with that partner.
Hmm. It almost sounds like developing that sexual voice, that confidence, is something that maybe comes with time and experience. But in those earlier sexual encounters, that lack of communication seems particularly strong, driven by anxiety about, well, skill and potential rejection.
Precisely. And the reluctance to talk isn't just, an abstract problem. The study found a direct link to something else: faking orgasms.
Ah, right. The research showed a clear connection there. Women who felt more comfortable talking openly about sex, much less likely to fake orgasms. But those who felt they couldn't talk about desires, maybe because of embarrassment or those other reasons, they were more likely to pretend.
It makes sense if you think about it, right? If you don't feel you can ask for what you need to actually experience pleasure. Faking can seem like a way to manage the situation, maybe avoid awkwardness, please the partner temporarily, but ultimately it chips away at real intimacy and satisfaction in the long run.
The article mentions this idea of women developing a sexual voice. It said, on average, women started feeling more comfortable speaking up around their mid-20s. But it's not like a magic switch flips at 25, is it? Everyone's suddenly fine.
Not at all, no. Even with more life experience, maybe more sexual experience, the study showed that a significant number still face these communication hurdles. Think about it. 1 in 5 women in the study still felt uncomfortable telling their partner what they wanted sexually. And, maybe even more concerning, 1 in 10 weren't confident their partner even cared about their pleasure.
Those are really sobering statistics. It really drives home that even with time, these underlying issues, these barriers can stick around for a lot of women. Makes you think about all the missed opportunities for, well, deeper connection and more pleasure.
It does. And, while this study focused specifically on women's experiences, it's so important to remember this likely isn't just about women. The article rightly points out these challenges in communicating sexual desires probably affect people of all genders, all sexual orientations. Being able to talk openly and honestly about what you want sexually, that's fundamental for healthy sexual relationships, for everyone.
Absolutely. And the benefits that come from that open communication, better sexual satisfaction, more trust, more confidence in yourself sexually, even just better communication overall in the relationship, those benefits aren't specific to one gender. They're universal.
Exactly. So if we connect this all back, fostering an environment where talking openly about sex is okay, where it's normalized, that's absolutely crucial for developing a healthy, robust sense of your sexual self. For everyone involved, it's about creating that safe space, that feeling of empowerment, where people feel okay expressing needs and desires without fearing judgment or shame or rejection.
So if we boil it all down, the main takeaway here is just how incredibly important open, honest communication is for our sexual well-being. And this study gives us a much deeper look at the many reasons why people, particularly women in this research, might feel they have to keep those desires hidden away.
And that really leads to a question for you, listening right now. As you've heard all this, what parts resonate most with you, with your own understanding of relationships, of communication, and maybe more practically, what might be just one small step, something concrete, you can think about taking towards having more open, honest conversations about desire? In your own life, perhaps.
It's definitely something to chew on, worth reflecting on. And if this deep dive has sparked something for you, maybe a next step could be just actively thinking about the potential upsides of more open communication in your own connections. There are also some really good resources out there about healthy sexual communication, relationship counseling too, that might offer more support. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.